Let's go, yeah. All out of state, so the man they never seen that. Ain't fat, Joe, and snap your fingers, then you lean back. All out of state, so the man they never seen that. Ain't fat, Joe, and snap your fingers, then you lean back.
Bula, and welcome back to Viti Vibes, the show where inspired youth inspire youth. I'm your host, Shannon Primal. As a youth-led and supporting Fijian youth show, we want our viewers to know that your involvement is highly encouraged. Therefore, we want to extend the opportunity and openly invite any and all Fijian community members, no matter where you live in the world, to be a part of our show. Before we kick off this episode, Eid Mubarak to all those celebrating. I'd now like to hand it off to Shivangni Naiker for a quick second to talk about a scholarship opportunity.
Canadian Federation of Fiji Organization is bringing back their post-secondary scholarship program. Any current grade 12 or post-secondary school students can apply in Canada. Deadline to apply is May 31st, so make sure to visit cfofo.ca for applications today. Thank you!
Thank you, Shivangni. With all of that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our special guest for this episode, an extraordinary youth leader, Simran Nath. So please have a look. So hello everyone, and thanks for sticking around here with us at Viti Vibes. This week we are focusing on a topic that I think not many of us personally think about enough, because it usually makes people feel uncomfortable. The thing, though, is that an uncomfortable conversation is the first step to making people aware about certain issues that exist and destigmatizing it as well. Today, we'll be speaking about period poverty in particular, and I'm no expert on the topic, but that's exactly why I have a much more knowledgeable woman here with me today. So allow me to introduce to you Simran Nath. First off, thank you so much for virtually being here with me. How are you doing, Simran?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here and talking to your audience at Viti Vibes. Thank you for having me. And just to put it, I'm not an expert either. I'm just passionate about this topic, and I've had to do a lot of research to quote unquote become more knowledgeable myself. Or I'm not a self-proclaimed expert, but I definitely can advise a lot on the topic of period poverty. So I'm very excited to talk to you about that and to your audience as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Simran. So before we dive into the topic itself and everything, I want you to tell the viewers a little bit more about yourself, like give a brief bio.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Simran Nath. I was born in Fiji, but I came to the States when I was very young. I think I came to the States when I was about 6 months old. So my entire childhood and, basically I was raised entirely in California, specifically in the Bay Area. I grew up in Hayward and I went off to college in Cal State Long Beach, where I graduated in 2018, which feels so crazy to say now. But I got my degree in communication studies and marketing. And since then, I've delved in different industries across the entertainment industry, real estate, and now I'm working in construction tech. So in the midst of all that, I've, had the chance to kind of explore what I'm passionate about, think about things that interest me outside of my career. And that's kind of where I started to think about Period 24. I've kind of always just wanted to help individuals out in whatever sense that is, and in whatever community I'm serving. In high school, I was part of a youth center. I helped organize a youth center that came basically from the ground up into a huge building that now serves youth anywhere between the ages of 5 to 25. And I think that's kind of where this idea of just helping people kind of started. And that was essentially the seed idea of Period 24, of just okay, how can I help people with this specific issue? And yeah, that's kind of quick little bio about me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I know you mentioned that you're from the States, and obviously people are probably wondering why we're doing a Zoom call. So that's the reason why. Me and Simran are actually in two totally different countries. So that's why we're having this Zoom call. So Simran, whereabouts in the States are you from?
So I am from the Bay Area, Northern California. I'm not too sure how familiar your viewers are with Hayward, but grew
Okay.
up in Hayward. Now I'm living in a suburban area, like close to Walnut Creek, which is a little bit further east from Hayward. So still
Okay.
in the Bay Area, but it's just a different location.
I've heard of all these places because I know that there is a quite a big Fijian population out there. So,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
All right. Well, despite you being from a whole other country, I just want to let you know that the impact you create is obviously seen and felt beyond just there with all the work that you do. So I want to ask you more about your community work with this nonprofit called Period 24. So first things first, what is this organization and what's your role?
Definitely. So Period 24 is a nonprofit organization aimed at ending period poverty as well as increasing inclusive sex education. So what that essentially means is, for those who don't know, period poverty is the inaccessibility to receive period products such as tampons, pads, lighters, etc. In the States, it's actually much more common than you think. 1 in 5 adolescents do not receive period products, and this prevents them from getting like their basic needs of just like going to school, participating in that. And in the sense of, once I realized that the inaccessibility to get period products was stopping girls from getting their education, I was baffled, because it is something that I've never had to think twice about. It was always something that I knew was accessible for me, whether that was through my mom, through my aunts, through my cousins. Like I always just had some means of getting this product. So knowing that this is something that so many people deal with for a majority of their lives and have to deal with on like a monthly basis, and don't even have the basic products to um, get what they need to control this biological occurrence, it kind of baffled me. But that's where Period 24 started. And I'm the founder. I'm also kind of just like the person who does a lot of everything for a very long time. But as I'm sure you understand as well, being the founder of anything.
Yeah,
But right now we have a team of, I believe, 5 girls.
awesome. So
Yeah, five
yeah,
girls.
so I honestly have such a high respect for all the work that you do, especially with everything that else you're doing, your responsibilities, your work, and then on top of that, addressing such an important issue that, like I said, not many people are comfortable addressing, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for touching on what and explaining what period poverty is and all that. Um, it's such a large scale issue, honestly. I think, in my opinion, that not many people realize that it's not just like a developing country's problem, but it's also like a developed country's problem as well. And it shows like the differences in like classes and wage gaps, social economic disparities and all that sort of stuff. But that
Yes.
being said, that leads me into my next question. So what do you think are some like risk factors and main causes of period poverty?
So you touched up on a really big topic, which is kind of why I started Period 24 in the first place. So the founding story of Period 24 started in Fiji. I was visiting Fiji for my cousin's wedding, and I think this was back in 2016. I think so. It's quite some time ago. And my sister started, she got her period while we were on the trip, and we're like, okay, she wasn't expecting to start it, so we had to just we were in Suva town. We're at the big market that's in Suva, and my mom was just like, yeah, this is the biggest shop on the island. And I was like, okay, great. It was so fun to see that. So my sister was like, okay, since we're here, let's go get some tampons. So we went there, and I kid you not, what I saw was a single shelf of just single size pads and tampons that didn't even have applicators. So for those of you who don't know, the tampons that we commonly see here in the States have an applicator, which makes it easier to insert and get that flow ready and steady. But I've never even used an applicator free tampon, and knowing the stigma and just the taboo that comes around anything to do with sexual education, anything to come with periods, or anything to do really with just anything just regarding the feminine body within the Indo-Fijian culture, knowing that, understanding that this is probably maybe this is an assumption, but I don't know how you know, in detail, people are like having these conversations with their daughters, with their sisters, with like the young women in their life of just like how important like cleanliness is, or how important like, you know, just having that sanitation is for your period, is what got me thinking of just like, okay, like, you know, what, like, how are these people even like, you know, how are the women in this country, the menstruators in this country, even able to like properly address this issue? So I think your question was like the how do we scale like the differences between that, right? Like,
Like
or do
risk
you mind?
factors, main causes, stuff like that. Yeah. But
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of main causes, and I think like, you know, part of it is has to do with like it's a gendered issue, right? So it's like for those who are like in the states, we see that like, you know, those in charge, like politically, like, you know, there's been many states that have tried to advocate for free period products, like, you know, statewide. And you know, even I myself have gone to like, you know, like California legislators and like, you know, heard about their stance on like, you know, getting rid of quote unquote the tampon tax, which is like, you know, being charged on products as a luxury item when like, you know, we can, like, I'm sure you can attest to like have like, you know, these products are not luxurious at all.
yeah.
So being taxed on such a product that like, you know, for a product at that scale, it just doesn't make any type of sense. So like you have that political issue of just like fighting for the like, you know, the stance of just being like, I shouldn't be taxed on this. And then you have like the cultural issues that like, you know, maybe people like you know, don't always see that like, hey, like, you know, people who menstruate are quote unquote clean. That's something that like, you know, we see that. I mean, it's even translated sometimes in like into religion, right? Like, you know, I know in the Hindu religion, I myself am a Hindu, we're not allowed to like touch anything sacred when we're on our period. And like that in itself is a completely like, you know, different story. And like if you like trace back the origins of like where that actually came from, it's almost inaccurate to how it's interpreted, like, you know, in the current day. So there's so many levels to why I think period products are inaccessible that don't just stem at like, you know, a financial aspect. It's like a political issue, it's a social issue, and like it's clearly a worldwide issue because like exactly what you said, like, you know, I realized that like people in Fiji, like not to mention the price point at these products that were being sold in Fiji were extremely high that I couldn't imagine like, you know, what like a median like household would be able to afford these products. But when I came back to America and started doing my research here, like, you know, where it's supposed to be like, you know, such a progressive country, where like 1 in 5 girls are missing school because they can't get period products. So clearly, like, you know, you hear the frustration in my voice that like this just seems like so unacceptable. So yeah, there's a lot of issues, and it's like, you know, like with any major issue, like, you know, there's different parts at play when it comes to that disparity.
Thank you for going so in depth. You definitely touched on a lot of things, and it's really interesting to hear that this whole organization started kind of from an experience that you had back in Fiji.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting. So I want to ask, with your organization, have you done any projects or any things that you've done with your organization?
Yeah, definitely. So our organization started in August of 2019. And since then, we've really just been like an Instagram page. And if you're not following us right now, you can definitely follow us on Instagram at period.24, all spelled out. But essentially, our first event was held in October of 2019. We were able to partner with a lot of other like really great female-led organizations, such as Boss Women Collective, which partnered with another organization called Workwell. And we were able to obtain products from this company called Cora, who helped us donate products over to the San Francisco LGBT Center. So that was essentially our first drive that we were able to do, or our first event. And, you know, it was amazing. Shortly after, around March of 2020, is when we were able to partner with LinkedIn and do a drive with them, which was huge for us. And then, you know, at this time, I think like the organization was still only like, you know, less than 6 months old. So like for me to like be able to partner with LinkedIn, I was like over the moon. I was like, this is insane. I don't know how like, you know, this is happening. And of course, shortly after that, that's when like the peak of the pandemic was happening. So you know, we really tried to like reach out to like, you know, whoever our followers were at the time to just be like, hey, you know, if you need products, like, you know, we can push those out. So just like, you know, getting those products out there to the people in need during a very fragile time of like, you know, our entire world at like the peak of COVID. We've also done other partnerships with organizations such as Building Futures, as well as, excuse me, I'm blanking on the name, but we try to partner a lot with either youth homeless shelters or with women's shelters that help women in unideal situations, whether that's like dealing with domestic violence, homelessness, essentially just dealing with like or helping marginalized communities that need that extra help, especially when it comes to basic needs. And we actually have a drive going on right now. And we are currently partnered with the Long Beach LGBT Center. And if you would like to participate and donate, you can head over to the link in our bio and purchase items over there via Amazon that will be sent directly to that center over there in Long Beach.
That's awesome. You've outdone yourself in such a short amount of time too, because this organization isn't that old either. About how long have you had it for?
Yeah, so I guess August of this year would be 2 years. And like, and that's on top of just like juggling work and life and all of that. So I appreciate you saying that, because to me, I always feel like I'm not doing enough for it. I always feel like, there's just like a million more things that I could be doing. But like sometimes I have to step back and be like, okay, you're still working. You're still like, doing things that like every other normal person is doing. So can't be like, too hard on yourself at that point.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, your work is definitely seen and felt from even here, being here in Vancouver, Canada. Like, I definitely want to give you credit where it's due, because you're doing such amazing work. You started off obviously yourself, and then you built a team of BIPOC and youth for your team. So that's amazing. So I actually want to go on and ask you something more of like kind of your personal perspective. So specifically in regard to the Fijian community, how do you think our community members view or handle menstrual care and equity?
That's a good question. In terms of menstrual care, I think that like our women do a good job of like being supportive to one another, especially, or I can only speak from my perspective, which is the like American Indo-Fijian perspective, right? So like, my community here, for the most part, like, I think I felt like very supported in that I've had like, a lot of like friends, cousins, aunts who like, were like, oh, when I like, had started my period. I do think there's better ways that we can address the situation. I think like, there's like easier ways, especially when you're like, a young girl going through puberty. In terms of menstrual equality, I don't know if there's enough knowledge out there amongst our community to realize that this is a problem. I only say that because like even in general, like, when I speak to a lot of people, or when I, go to conferences and I'm speaking, like a lot of people come up to me and be like, hey, I didn't even realize this was an issue. And these are other like, women coming up to me, or other menstruators coming up to me, telling me that they didn't realize that like, hey, people can't afford like, menstrual care products. So again, like, these are like a lot of assumptions that I could be making, and they could be highly inaccurate. But I think that like as a community, we could definitely be doing more in terms of just getting basic like, menstrual care knowledge out there, in terms of just like, hey, like, this is how you apply a pad, or this is how you apply a tampon, and this is how frequently you should be changing these items so that you don't, get sick. And like, this is like, why you need to, you like toxic shock syndrome is the reason that you should be changing your tampon every 4 hours, and this is what toxic shock syndrome is, and these are the symptoms. And just like going into things like that, I think are conversations that could be happening a lot more in our communities. But I think that like, that's why like there are platforms like, Period 24 and like, Viti Vibes that push these like, topics out there. And I think that's something I really applaud like our generation for, and people like yourself who like, want to put these stories out there and want to like inform the public about like things that like other youth are doing, not only for like, the Fijian community, but just for like communities in general. So, applaud for you over there. And I think this is great that like you have a platform for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Just kind of going off my personal experience, I guess I'll throw that in there. I find that obviously like women they take care of one another, but I think it's also very important for men to also realize that this is an issue as well. So I want to ask you, like, why do you think this is such a significant issue that like everyone needs to be concerned about?
Well, I think that that question is layered, right? So when we think about like dynamics, there are different dynamics. Maybe like, maybe a household doesn't have a mom. So like, the dad has to have this conversation with their daughter. And it's just like, how does that happen? But, like the male should also be informed of these things that are happening because they have to teach that to their daughter. Or, maybe it's like a brother-sister dynamic where like, maybe like a sister doesn't feel comfortable going to like, whoever they can go to, or like, whatever the case is, it's just like creating these open and safe spaces to have those conversations are very important. And I think there's another layer onto that as well, is just, and something that like Peer 24 all really tries to advocate for is the trans community. So like, there are a lot of people who, this is a very, in whatever situation you're in, like, or whatever point in life you're in, like getting your period is a huge transformation. And speaking to members from the trans community through the work of Period 24, we've learned that this is a very uncomfortable, like even more uncomfortable time for them because they're battling their own body constantly. So like going through this sometimes is painful. Going through menstruation can be like very confusing, and just knowing how to navigate those conversations and being inclusive and knowing the right ways to approach those, especially like, regardless of like, whether it's like, a woman to woman communicating, a man to woman communicating, like, whatever the case is, there just needs to be like, available open dialogue so that people feel safe through this like, transformative experience in their life.
I think one of the things that I really appreciate is the fact that you make a very important point in using inclusive language with your organization and your endeavors. So for example, you state that not all people menstruate are women. And I remember seeing this post the first time on your IG page, and it took me a second to think about it, but then I'm like, she's not wrong. You know what I mean? And so like, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on why the language we choose to use is so important?
Yeah, of course. In any aspect, language is, okay, so like I study communication, right? So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I've always just been interested in the way that we communicate with one another. And if you're trying to provide a space that feels inclusive, you need to do the work to do that. And I highly commend my team for that. And that was something that was very important to me to incorporate that into my team, which is why, like, our team is completely like, women of color led. And that's important in itself. So as a woman of color, like I've experienced like, the discriminations and the marginalizations that come with that. I know like on different aspects of as well, whether that's just like at school, at work, or even just like moving through life, like I can understand that, like what it feels like to be a woman of color, to constantly either just be dismissed or be like, judged or be talked over, whatever the case is. And that like, comes from a place of respect. So if I want respect from like, what I'm doing to simply exist, I need to be able to provide and create other space where people can feel respected as well, regardless of like who they are. Like I truly believe that. And if that means that, somebody wants me to use specific pronouns and in the way that I address them or talk to them, or more importantly, talk about them in a piece that I'm writing, I need to respect that. If somebody like, tells me like, hey, I think that you should change the verbiage in this because it sounds way too centered into like, whether it's like femme-centric or whatever the case is, like, okay, then that means like, I need to sit back and reflect on like why, like, why are these perspectives over here? Because it's one thing to say that like, hey, like, we support people who like are menstruators that aren't always women, but it's another thing to actually try and really push that and be out there. And I think like, that's where like it's been a challenge for me in trying to do that. And like, because you have to learn, right? Like it's not something that's just always readily available. Like you have to talk to people, you have to like, do bring on people onto your team who are more knowledgeable than you in that. And I think that's kind of just where all of that stems from, and like, how you can progress through that. But it's also why it's important, because the better that we can like learn and like, hear each other out in a place that we feel comfortable, the more we can learn and progress and just be able to, move in a better direction, is my opinion.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful way you put it. I absolutely love it. I want to stress to our audience that inclusive language is absolutely important to think about, because it's a practice that acknowledges diversity and brings respect to one another, like you mentioned as well. So more people need to realize that inclusive language actually promotes equality. So that's my little 2 cents on it. But we are out of time for today. Thank you so much, Simran, for joining us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This show obviously is by youth for Fijian youth, And it's just so amazing to see that there's people across the world, Fijian youth, doing such amazing things. And anyways, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed talking with you. And to our viewers at home who are able to learn more about you and the amazing work that you're doing. So that wraps up our interview here with Simran. Make sure you check out her social media pages, which is at period.24 on Instagram. And I know Simran also has a YouTube channel. So Simran, if you want to just quickly plug that as well.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to follow me and like my personal life, you can follow my page at Simran S. Nath on Instagram, and follow my YouTube page, which is Simran and Nikhil, and you can check out, the fun stuff my boyfriend and I like to do when we're not trying to end period poverty.
Thank you, Simran, for joining us. Thank you again, Simran, for joining us this week. Make sure you stay posted on her Instagram, which is at Simran S. Nath, and you can also follow her nonprofit page, which is at period.24. That wraps up our show for this week, but we hope you enjoyed it as much as I did bringing it to you. Remember that this is your show too, so please feel free to let us know of any feedbacks, comments, or suggestions you may have for our future episodes. Not only that, but if you or anyone you know would like to be on our show, then please give us a call at 778-709-2853 or email us at vitivibestv@gmail.com. If you have any events or information that targets or invites Fijian youth, then please feel free to let us know about that as well. We'd be more than happy to put it on our show and share with our audience. For sponsorship inquiries, you could also call or email us. Remember that you can catch our show every Thursday at 10 p.m. and reruns on Sundays at 4:30 p.m., which is right after our parent show, Fiji in Focus. For those of you who aren't able to tune into our show on television, you're able to check it out on Shaw Multicultural's program YouTube channel. Be sure to share the videos with your families and friends, and also be sure to follow and like our Facebook and Instagram page, which is at Viti Vibes TV. I look forward to having you all tune in next week. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy. I'm your host, Shannon Pramal, signing off. Banaka.
Let's go, yeah. All out of state, so the day they never seen that. Ain't fat, Joe, and shake your fingers, then you lean back. All out of state, so the day they never seen that.